The 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, is the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhists. He is the optimum symbol of Tibet, living in exile for nearly 7 decades now. He is the fountain of strength for all of Tibet. Dalai Lama, meaning ocean of wisdom in Mongolian, is believed to be the manifestation of Avalokiteshvara, or the Chenrezig, the Bodhisattva of compassion, the patron saint of Tibet. The institution of the Dalai Lama is part of the Tulku concept in Tibetan Buddhism. They believe spiritual masters are reincarnated upon their death so that their teachings can be preserved and carried forward. The 14th Dalai Lama stands between China and Tibetan struggle for freedom turning violent. When China occupied Tibet, he fled with his followers and came to India. Since then, India has been his home, and he became the reason for the non-violent resistance movement of Tibetans. He guided generations in the past 7 decades to observe peace, embrace empathy, and look for a political solution for Tibet.
Not seeking independence.
It hasn't happened. Tibet is recognized as the integral part of the Chinese Republic. China calls it an autonomous region. But the 14th Dalai Lama and Tibetans living in exile don't believe that Tibet is autonomous.
You see, we seeking genuine autonomy, not seeking independence.
Tibetans for all these years, for 3 generations now, have followed him unequivocally. Right before he turned 80, the 14th Dalai Lama indicated that he could be the last one.
The very institution of Dalai Lama should continue or not up to Tibetan people. You see, my death may not come within next year or 2 years. I think my death may come after, 15, 20 years. Then the circumstances is such that then, you see, no longer relevant, this institution, then automatically cease. I have no worry, the Dharma institution will cease one day.
Over the years, he has relinquished all political power to the Central Tibetan Administration. A decade after he announced that he could be the last Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, on the eve of turning 90 years old, has revealed a succession plan.
If it is about Lama's reincarnation, when all the followers have unanimously said that the reincarnation should continue, then it is obvious that it will come. Since my 24 September 2011 statement, which states that responsibility for doing so will rest exclusively with members of the Garden Fodrang Trust, the office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, they should consult the various heads of the Tibetan Buddhist traditions and the reliable oath-bound Dharma protectors who are linked inseparably to the lineage of the Dalai Lamas. They should accordingly carry out the procedures of search and recognition in accordance with past traditions. I hereby reiterate that the Garden Fodrang Trust has sole authority to recognize the future reincarnation. No one else has any such authority to interfere in this matter.
The 14th Dalai Lama has made Dharamsala in Himachal Pradesh his home in exile since 1959, after a failed uprising against Chinese rule in Tibet. Tibetans from around the world have gathered in Dharamsala to celebrate the 19th birth year of the 14th Dalai Lama. They're anxious about the future without the current Dalai Lama.
Of course, there will be a big void in his absence. And even now we feel a little bit because he's not as active as before because of his age. But then the important thing that the people should learn is the message of the Buddha. When the Buddha was passing away and his followers surrounding him and weeping and crying, when you are gone, the light is gone, who is going to replace you? The Buddha said, when I'm gone, my teaching is my representative. He did not appoint any one single individual as a representative. So, to be correct, we should, think about this, not just thinking about one person, but the universal message. And message will remain forever.
A world without him is unthinkable, all the more since they live in exile. The current generation born and brought up away from Tibet knows the 14th Dalai Lama as home and all that Tibet stands for.
We are not worried about these procedures, but rather about what will happen in the future with the Tibetan causes. Right? Yes, we are worried. The big storm is coming. Right? For that, we are not escaping from that. We have dealt for the centuries, and we will deal with that.
We all the people of Tibet feel very anxious due to his old age. But as he have already turning 90 years old, so we are very feeling both auspicious and also very sad to celebrate his holiness over there.
Now, why are you feeling anxious and sad?
I'm just sad because he's very turning old, and usually he promised us that he will stay till 113 years old. So it's nearing, so he's very anxious.
With the Dalai Lama advancing in age, the celebratory mood among his followers is tinged with unease as they worry about the future of the Tibetan movement in the event of his passing. And the tussle of power that is bound to start between China and the Tibetans.
I'm grateful that I'm, having this opportunity to celebrate His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama in here, and also wishing and hoping that he would live a long life.
Their dream of free Tibet found many friends across the world, but none that could stand up against the mighty China. Hollywood star and ardent follower of Dalai Lama, Richard Gere, is in Dharamsala to celebrate like all others.
Look, we were blessed to have His Holiness as the leader. But, His Holiness has been very clear that at some point the body's going to fall apart for all of us. And we all have to be aware that His Holiness can't carry us on His shoulders forever. We have to carry ourselves and we have to carry each other. So we're all doing that.
But this promise of a celebrity is not enough to stand against the world politics and power tussle. The dragon stands ominously to challenge the Avalokiteshvara. China opposed the succession plan which was laid out by the 14th Dalai Lama.
The reincarnation of living Buddhas is a unique way of succession in Tibetan Buddhism, which has lasted for over 700 years and has formed a strict religious, ritual and historical custom. The reincarnated children of major living Buddhas, such as the Dalai Lama and the Panchen Lama, need to be identified through evaluation and approval by the central government. The 14th Dalai Lama was found and approved by the then nationalist government without the need for a golden urn draw after the death of the 13th Dalai Lama, in strict accordance with religious rituals and historical customs.
The Dalai Lama was well prepared for this. He knew that China would never allow his successor to be chosen by the non-profit institution he created. The 14th Dalai Lama registered Garden Fodrang as a trust in 2011 in Zurich with the aim of recognizing the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. Since the time of the second Dalai Lama, his residential quarters at Drepung Monastery in Lhasa have been called Garden Fodrang. After the Potala Palace was built, the Dalai Lamas moved away from these quarters and stayed at Potala Palace in winter and Norbulinka in summer. The tradition was followed until the 14th Dalai Lama's escape from Lhasa to India in March 1959. The Garden Fodrang today is based on the office of the Dalai Lama and is managed by the former Kalon Tripa, or the head of the CTA. Professor Samdong Rinpoche is a senior monk and a close confidant of the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama himself heads the trust, and its other members include close aides of the spiritual leader. Following the 14th Dalai Lama's indication, the Garden Fodrang is being prepared for the next one who could possibly be born outside Tibet.
There is no traditional kind of restriction. The Dalai Lama should be born in Tibet. The Dalai Lama born in Mongolia, the third one, and the Dalai Lama born today in India, the sixth Dalai Lama, and there's no nationality or geographical boundary.
Tibetan tradition holds that the soul of a senior Buddhist monk is reincarnated in the body of a child on his death. And the discussion of his reincarnation and succession has never happened before while he has been alive. But nearly a century later, when the 14th Dalai Lama no more resides in the Potala Palace, his succession is a matter of a geopolitical issue between China, India, and the United States of America.
Generally, while a Lama is still alive, there won't be any talk about his reincarnation. That talk only comes when that Lama passes away. But in this time, the discussion is coming mainly because the Chinese government is interfering in the reincarnation of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. That's why the discussion is coming up regarding his reincarnation. Otherwise, there won't be any discussion as long as the Dalai Lama is still alive.
The 14th Dalai Lama was born as Lamo Dhondup on the 6th of July 1935 to a farming family in northeastern Tibet. When he was 2 years old, a search party sent by the Tibetan government identified him as the reincarnation of the 13th Dalai Lama, as he identified the belongings of his predecessor as his own. In the winter of 1940, Lama Dhondup was taken to the Potala Palace in Lhasa, the capital of today's Tibet Autonomous Region, and officially installed as a spiritual leader of the Tibetans. He was renamed Tenzin Gyatso and enthroned. The 5-year-old was taught and prepared for the next decade to become the leader he is today. 2 regents ruled in his place until he assumed full state powers at the age of 15. When Chinese troops entered Tibet in 1950 and overthrew the Buddhist theocracy, the Dalai Lama sought refuge on the Tibet-Sikkim border in the Himalayas. He returned to Lhasa a year later under a Sino-Tibetan accord. China agreed that Tibet retained autonomy and the Dalai Lama retained his status. In return, Tibet surrendered control of its foreign affairs to China. The uncomfortable coexistence was shattered in March 1959. After Chinese reforms were introduced to end centuries of feudalism, Tibetans staged an abortive uprising in which thousands were killed.
The Tibetan objection is that this is actually a religious matter, that this is Avalokiteshvara and the transmigration of soul that is transferred into the next Dalai Lama, and then the whole process would lead to Maitreya in heaven. And so this is a spiritual kind of thing that China has no role in this process, in this procedure of selecting the reincarnation.
2 months and 6 days short of his 25th birthday, the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet, dressed in a peasant's clothing, had crossed the Burnla from Tibet into Arunachal Pradesh and made his way to Tawang. That was the 31st of March 1959. 8 days before that, and 500 kilometers to the north, the People's Liberation Army had marched into his home in Lhasa.
The night we escaped, the funny thing was my mother and my sister, they were dressed up as men. That was the funny part. Then the rest, there's a lot of excitement going with the armed bodyguards, then also the Khambas from once we crossed the river. And then now if I look back, the situation was so tense, I don't think I can do it again. But during that particular period, I didn't feel a thing.
The younger brother of the Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, was 13 years old then. Today more popularly known as the Nagari Rinpoche among the Tibetan community, he remembers the arduous journey across the border and how he chronicled it in his camera. Thousands of Tibetans followed his 23-year-old brother and crossed the McMahon line that demarcated the land between India and Tibet. Together, they started their lives in exile.
I think it's entirely dependent on Chinese government. Previous times they expressed their interest in inviting His Holiness the Dalai Lama to China and Tibet, and His Holiness has at many occasions expressed his wish to visit China and Tibet if it's possible. But Chinese government put this condition that if His Holiness comes to China or Tibet, he should stay back. And His Holiness' response is, if I get to go to Tibet and China, I will go, but I will not live there because there is no freedom there. And I think this is also connected with the reincarnation when His Holiness says that I will be born in a free world. So we still don't know whether this is possible or not.
The process of identifying his reincarnation and the subsequent grooming of the 15th Dalai Lama would span over more than a decade. In those days, Beijing will exert its pressure and prepare its own proxy.
The China still consider Dalai Lama reincarnation something very important. So they have more concern about next Dalai Lama.
India raised a strong objection to China's demand that Beijing must approve the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama, asserting that no one except the Tibetan spiritual leader himself has the authority to decide on his successor.
Indian response would be very mild also at this point of time. One of the reasons why India is making this in a gradual manner and a very slow process is that Mao Zedong in 1962 in a Central Military Commission meeting in September of that year said, since India had given refuge to the Dalai Lama, it had interfered in the internal affairs of China, and hence they waged a war on India. So this is in the background of the sensitivities, and hence the except for President Mukherjee, Pranab Mukherjee, we have not seen any public functionaries meeting in the recent times, at least in the public sphere.
The United States, which faces rising competition from China for global dominance, has repeatedly said that it is committed to advancing the human rights of Tibetans. US lawmakers have previously said that they would not allow China to influence the choice of the Dalai Lama's successor. But when the time comes, economic and political compulsions would rule the game.
China-US trade is about $580 billion. And Trump administration today, even though he launched tariff wars, he had been very soft on China in recent times, last 1.5 to 2 months. This indicates that Tibet may also become a factor in the commercial interests of the United States. We do not know exactly because there has been different policies followed by the Trump administration recently, last 2-3 months. So it is not very clear, but there are two laws, congressional laws, which suggest that something is binding on the president as well. So it is not a very clean path in the US policy towards Tibet.
Tibetans are well aware of the situation. They know there would be few to count on when the real time comes. But taught, guided and prepared by the 14th Dalai Lama over the past 8 decades, they're ready to take on the dragon.
The Chinese government's interference in the reincarnation process is very ridiculous because the government itself is atheist. It does not believe in religion, and the reincarnation process is mainly religious. So the Chinese government doesn't have the right, and it is only because of their invasion and political interest, their mindset, that they are interfering in the reincarnation.
We are perhaps one of the weakest freedom struggles where everybody has taken advantage of us. Germany and France and UK, America, Europe, Canada, Australia, everybody has benefited at our cost because they have been trading with China.
Now the responsibility lies on us as to how we carry forward the legacy of His Holiness, how we carry forward the vision of His Holiness, and also work towards resolution of the Sino-Tibet conflict. The absence of His Holiness would be a huge setback for the Tibetans. Yes, as you said, His Holiness is the face so far to the international community, but the international community also have to think the issue is not only about His Holiness, which China tries to make. China tries to say it's an issue of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and a few people close to him. This is not the case. This is of the 7.3 or 7.8 million Tibetans inside Tibet.
In recent years, the 14th Dalai Lama has been in and out of the hospital a couple of times. His failing health is a concern for his avid followers, but the Nobel laureate has peacefully etched a path in his life of non-violence and traditional continuation. Walking on the same path, he has now ensured that he is not the last Dalai Lama, and Tibet will continue to exist as the thorn by the dragon that it cannot escape.